Assalamu alaikum, family. Um, I want to take some time to address some of the claims that were leveled against the Nation of Islam by our brother, young Pharaoh, a week or two ago. Before I get started, I want to make sure it's clear what I am not doing. For one, I'm not attacking our brother, young Pharaoh. Not. It's not my intent to be antagonistic at all during this video. I merely want to offer evidence that's contrary to the information that brother was presenting in his video series about the Nation of Islam. To get it on the record, I was glad to see Brother Pharaoh, Brother Ben X, Brother Rizza, Brother Minister Willie. I was glad to see those brothers get together and hash out their conflict before it escalated into somebody being hurt. I think that was a good example for the youth to see. I think it was necessary. I think it was needed. And I think it goes to show that the youth today, as well as being aggressive, as well as being very passionate, they also have the ability to let calmer heads prevail. They also have the ability to be humble. And I appreciated Brother Pharaoh, young Pharaoh's efforts to calm down, pull back some of his rhetoric, and even pull down some of the material he had posted on the internet. So I give brother much props and much praise for being a man and addressing the issue in that particular fashion. But one of the things brother mentioned was he was going to keep several of his videos up that he made with regard to the nation. And he said that if anybody has any information to the contrary or any response to the information that he provided, well then they could make a video and respond to his claims in their video. And so that's what I'm doing with this video here. Again, I'm not coming at brother. I'm not seeking to rekindle any kind of feud that's dead, and it needs to remain dead. But in the interest of truth and in the interest of scholarship, I do want to address some of the claims that brother made in his presentation. So with that being said, I want to start out just talking about some of the things I want to discuss. First and foremost, brother made the claim about the origins of Islam being in 1919, I believe he said. That's a point that I want to take up. After that, I want to talk a little bit about the Nation of Islam and the meeting with the Ku Klux Klan. Brother made a separate video documenting that event that actually took place. I also want to talk about briefly the Nation of Islam with regard to it killing Malcolm. That's a charge that's been leveled at the Nation of Islam ever since it happened. And we want to talk about that. We want to put some things on the table and just look at that for what it is and look at that in a way that it's never been looked at or discussed publicly before. And last, I want to end by just touching a little bit on the relationship between the Nation of Islam and Scientology, and again, offering a perspective that that has been offered before, but I don't think a lot of attention has been paid to it. So we just want to clarify that situation with the Nation of Islam and Scientology. So I didn't do it at the beginning, and I would like to do it now. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening to what I have to say. And as I begin, I would just like to greet everyone in the greeting words of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. So let's start off by listening to what what the young brother had to say. Brother Young Pharaoh talking about the origins of Islam. Let's hear what brother has to say.
This right here says, is Islam a part of Freemasonry? Right? Now this page right here, this is page 235. That's out of a book that I have right here sitting next to me called 33 Degrees of Deception. Now, this page right here is in regards to an interview with a 33rd degree Mason, right? Now, as you can see, question number 1, they asked him, are the Shriners part of Masonry? His answer was yes. The Shrine, okay, whose full name is the Ancient Arabic Order, Nobles of the Mystic Shrine, is a part of the Masonic system. It is the Islamic expression of Freemasonry, okay? It is one of the addendum groups within Masonry, which has attracted wide interest and acceptance and has become a major fixture within Freemasonry. The shrine was first organized in New York in 1872. So before I even go any further, nigga, that's coming out the mouth of a 33rd degree Mason himself, bitch. So don't sit here and tell me nothing about no Islam, okay? Now, when niggas sit here and try to say, oh, because the NOI is considered unorthodox Muslims, okay? Straight up. So just like you got the black Hebrews who battle with the white Jews, you got the NOI niggas, okay? And they got their own bullshit ass motherfucking Masonic form of masonry that they got from Farah Muhammad, who was a Jew, and I'm going to show that too. And they're a bullshit sector of masonry. But what I want to show y'all is that Islam is Freemasonry. Fuck is you talking about, nigga? Now watch this. Fuck is you talking about? Let's go. Gang. Okay. Now question number 2. Same page 235. I scanned this motherfucker in myself. I got the book right here. Straight up. Now watch this. Question number 2. Are these the men who wear the red hats with the tassels and glittery decorations? Answer, yes. The shrine is the most conspicuous part of masonry, okay? In fact, it is the only conspicuous part of masonry, while the rest of masonry is deliberately inconspicuous and maintains a low public profile. The shrine is deliberately conspicuous and maintains a high public profile. Now watch this. Once again, the question was, are these the men who wear the red hats with the tassel and the glittery decorations? The answer was, here's the motherfucking hat with the tassel. What the fuck is you talking about? What the fuck is you talking about? You see the fucking Shriner on the right, and you see Elijah on the left with the hat with the tassel. Nigga, fuck is you talking about? Now, a lot of y'all gonna sit here and say, oh, the Shriner got the sword on the hat, and Elijah got the motherfucking crescent star with the moon. Now watch this. I got something for Elijah right now. What's this? What is that? What is that, Elijah? Is that not Baphomet on your fucking head? Is that not a god in masonry and Satanism? Nigga, you see the 5-point star on Baphomet's head, and you see the crescent moon above his right arm. Motherfucker, that's Masonic, asshole. That's a cult. And we know for a fact that Elijah was a Prince Hall Mason. And I'm finna go in on their ass right now. Now, let's go to other sectors of masonry. Okay? Down here at the right, okay, you see what? The crescent moon and the 5-point star again. Okay? That's the logo of the female fraternity Masonic group called the Eastern Stars. So you see the crescent moon and a 5-point star all throughout masonry. You just clearly heard in this motherfucking question and answer, a 33rd degree Mason just tell you, okay, that Islam was a part of masonry. The fuck is you talking about, nigga? Now watch this. Watch this shit. I'm not even done. Let me go back in. Let me go back in before I make my point. Let me hit the FOI real quick, the fruit of Islam. Look at the hat. Look at the hat. Look at the hat. The hat on the right, okay, is the FOI hat, and the hat on the left is a York Rite hat. Now York Rite is a part of Mason. Just the same fucking hat. The only difference in the fucking hat, okay, is the symbol on the front. Your York Rite got the cross, okay? And the FOI got the star and the crescent moon. Okay? Okay? Now watch me really bury you motherfuckers. Watch me bury you niggas. Y'all niggas crazy. Watch me bury you niggas. Now watch this. Remember the star and the crescent moon, family. Remember the star and the crescent moon. I'm going to show you why that's important. Watch this. Because in that motherfucking question and answer, that 33rd degree master Mason said what? What did he say? He said that the Islamic branch of Freemasonry was started in 1872. Now, in the lecture, I proved that the Quran and Islam was printed and written in 1919. I'm gonna prove it again right now.
Let's pause it right there and let's deal with two of brothers' claims. First thing brother said was that Islam was created 1872 by Shriners. At the same time the Shriners were. Islam comes out of the Shriners. Well, the first thing we could do simply just go to the Shriners page and see what the Shriners say about their history. If we do that, we can read from the Shriners themselves what they say about their history. And let's read this. In 1870, a group of Masons gathered frequently for lunch at the Knickerbocker Cottage on 6th Avenue in New York City. At a special table on the second floor, a particularly fun-loving group of men met regularly. Among the regulars were Walter Fleming, MD, and William Florence, an actor. The group frequently talked about starting a new fraternity for Masons, one centered on fun and fellowship more than ritual. Fleming and Florence took this idea seriously enough to do something about it. Pay attention right here. Billy Florence had been on tour in France and had been invited to a party given by an Arabian diplomat. The exotic style, flavors, and music of the Arabian-themed party inspired him to suggest this as a theme for the new fraternity. Walter Fleming, a devoted fraternity brother, built on Fleming's ideas and used his knowledge of fraternal ritual to transform the Arabian theme into the ancient Arabic order of the nobles of the mystic shrine. With the help of the Knickerbocker Cottage regulars, Fleming drafted the ritual, designed the emblem and costumes, formulated the salutation, and declared that members would wear the red fez. Now, let's stop right there. Let's stop right there and take all of this in for a moment. What just happened? What did we read? We read, first we heard Brother Pharaoh quote from a supposed 33rd degree Mason. I don't know who the Mason was. I don't know the background of the author of the book that he quoted, but let's just go with what was presented. Saying that in 1872, the Shriners were created. And the Shriners were the Islamic representation of Masonry. And what we saw from the Shriners homepage says the exact same thing. I think young Pharaoh's getting confused a little bit because nothing in what 33 Degrees of Deception and nothing in what the Shriners homepage said means that Islam was created in 1872. The Shriners homepage clearly shows that a Mason traveling in Europe and the Middle East was influenced by an Arabic-themed party, an Islamic-themed party, and came back to the States and implemented a lot of the Islamic iconography into the establishment of this fraternity, the Shriners. That doesn't mean that Islam was created in 1872. That just means that the Shriners were created in 1872 and they adopted a lot of the regalia of Islam that this particular member saw as he traveled the world. That's clear cut. that's straightforward, and that comes straight from the Shriners' history themselves. But let's move on and let's deal with Islam being started in 1872. And in addition to that, brother mentions later on that the Quran, they started creating the Quran in 1872. And as you heard him say, it wasn't completed until 1919. So also at this 1872 meeting, supposedly the Quran began, and it didn't. They didn't complete making the Quran until 1919. Well, let's investigate that. What are we using? What are our sources here? Throughout our talk, I'm gonna use a combination of both primary and secondary sources. Your sources are critical. Your sources are very critical. Scholarship is not about going and finding something on the internet from Lord knows where, by Lord knows whom, just because it sounds good and it meets what your personal belief is. That's not scholarship. A lot of what Brother Pharaoh said in his presentation that we heard falls under logical fallacies. Much of what Brother said falls under the logical fallacy of guilt by association. We can look that up and see what that's an actual logical fallacy that people engage in when they take one thing that's associated with something, and then when they see that same thing associated with something else, they automatically assume that it has the same characteristics of the previous object. So, for example, the logical fallacy of guilt by association goes something like this. Adolf Hitler was a vegetarian. Therefore, all vegetarians are evil. That's a ridiculous claim. That's a logical fallacy known as guilt by association. And all throughout Brother's clip, he continuously associated the star and crescent with any and everybody else who may have used it throughout history. You cannot group items and designations into groups like that based on this group that used it or that group. That's a logical fallacy. So back to my point about references. I want to use primarily primary sources and secondary sources. And we're going to go to the secondary source to investigate Brother Young Pharaoh's claim that Islam and the Quran didn't begin until the Quran 1919. So what do we have here? I'm on the Internet Archive, and I have the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, some people might ask, why would I use the Encyclopedia Britannica? Well, for a number of reasons. I came up in the generation, I came up in the 70s and 80s. I came up in the generation before there was an internet. And in my generation, the internet of that time were encyclopedias. Most houses that you went into had a set of encyclopedias. Most often it was Encyclopedia Britannica. Encyclopedias at that time were a repository of information for most of the things that were known to exist in the world. When we wanted to find out about things, we couldn't go to a browser. We had to go and search encyclopedias. So encyclopedia is important because they provide a documentary record of what was known to be in existence at that particular time that you're looking at in that particular volume. So let's look at this particular edition we have here, the 11th edition of Encyclopedia Britannica. If I zoom in a little bit, we see that make sure I'm good here, the 11th edition, Encyclopedia Britannica. Well, when was the 11th edition published? As we see, this is published in 1911. So this is the version of the Encyclopedia Britannica that was published 8 years before Brother Pharaoh said that the Quran was in existence. So let's look at what this Encyclopedia Britannica has to say with regard to that. So we're going to scroll all the way over to the M's. And I'll show you why we scroll into the M's just in 1 second. And anybody can just get on the internet and get access to the encyclopedias here that I'm using. Now, what do we have? What do we see right here? Blow this up just a little bit. In this Encyclopedia Britannica from 1911, 8 years before young Pharaoh said that the Quran was created, what do we have? Muhammad. We're talking about Prophet Muhammad of Arabia right here. It's Muhammad because that's a derivation of spelling for Muhammad. When you see this Muhammad right here, this is typically how Muslims in the Nation of Islam spell Muhammad. But what is it saying? Muhammad, founder of the religious system called in Europe after him, Mohammedanism, and by himself, Islam. So it's telling you in this encyclopedia entry in 1911 that Prophet Muhammad, that Muhammad is the creator of what he called Islam. Now we're moving. We're gonna keep moving, but I want to get to something very specific. I just pointed out Muhammad because a lot of people say Muhammad didn't exist. Well, we have an entry here, document, and all this just is talking about the history of Muhammad, the institutions that Muhammad implemented, the law that Muhammad implemented. But here's where we want to be. We're in the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, the actual digitized copy. This is an actual Encyclopedia Britannica published in 1911 that they digitized to put online for safekeeping and for preservation purposes. What is this saying? Mohammedan religion. The Mohammedan religion is generally known as Islam. The name given to it by Muhammad himself. So we see talk about Islam. The expression Mohammedan religion has arisen in the West, probably from analogy with Christian religion, but is not recognized as a proper one by Muslim writers. Meaning we don't call the religion Mohammedanism. It's called Islam. But what about this Islam that is telling us about? Let's keep moving. This is what I want to get to. Here in 1911, we see listing of all of the surahs in the Quran. This particular entry here, the order of surahs in the Quran, is giving all of the surahs as they were revealed in order. In the 1st to the 5th year of the revelation, you had all of these surahs revealed to Prophet Muhammad. The 5th and the 6th year, you had all of these surahs. 7th year to his flight to Medina, all of these. All of these surahs, when you count all of these, they total 114 surahs. Why? Because there are 114 surahs in the entire Quran. So here we have, in 1911, a documentary record of a Quran consisting of all of the chapters that we find in the Quran today. And this takes place, this is in existence 8 years previous to when Brother Young Pharaoh said that the Quran was created in 1919. We see the existence of a Quran here from a document, from an artifact published in 1911. Now, I know what the argument may be. Some people will say, Brother Pharaoh himself may say, well, they started creating and working on the Quran in 1872 and it wasn't finished till 1919. Well, okay, well let's go with that. Let's go with that. I want to move to another artifact. And before I do, bear with me 1 second. As I bring this up. So again, I just want to make clear that we understand what we're looking at. We're looking at the 1911 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica with an entry about the Quran and listing all of the surahs in the Quran. This is 8 years before the Quran is supposed to be in existence, according to Brother Young Pharaoh. But that might not be conclusive enough evidence. That might be too close to 1919. His dates may have been off just by a couple of years. Well, let's see if we can push back a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about Omar ibn Said. Omar ibn Said was an African born in Senegal around 1770, the 18th century. If I can get this to come up. What makes Brother Omar unique is that brother was a West African from Senegal, but brother was also Muslim. He was raised as a Muslim. He knew Quran, and he even knew Arabic. And one of the reasons we want to talk about Omar ibn Said, this is brother right here, is because around the age of 30, he was abducted from his home in Senegal around 1807, stolen, and taken to South Carolina to be a slave. Now, Omar ibn Said lived the rest of his life in America as a slave, never returned to Africa, died a slave. But he's significant because he is the first and the only slave to ever write his autobiography in his native tongue, which was Arabic. He's noted for another reason as well. Let me see if I can bring these up too. Please bear with me. He has a rather remarkable story. And again, all of the documents that I'm pulling up, most of the documents actually that I'm pulling up, you'll be able to find yourself on the internet. And their primary and secondary sources, authoritative, primary and secondary sources. This was a inscription, that the actual inscription that Omar ibn Said wrote, and that was given to someone. This is his actual handwriting. This is the actual document that is being kept, but they have digitized images of it. And this is a very, very important document. And let me show you why. Hopefully you're able to see that. This is a very, very important document. This is the Lord's Prayer that Omar ibn Said wrote in Arabic on the right-hand side. Now, after he had been captured in 1807 and brought to America as a slave, Brother Omar eventually converted to Christianity. And he continued to do a lot of writings in Arabic, even though he converted to Christianity. I think he became Presbyterian. But there's something very interesting about this script that brother wrote. And let me tell you what it was. Now this script, as you can see down here, and I'll make it just a little bit more clear as I bring this up. This script, what we're looking at, he wrote in 1857. This was written, this Lord's Prayer was written in 1857. Focus a little bit more on the left. This is a copy of the wording, not the Arabic script, but the wording that was written on the left. Here's what it says. Make sure I'm presenting. Okay. Here's what it says. And you could try to make it out from the cursive handwriting, but below is a translation of what that writing says. The Lord's Prayer, written in Arabic by Uncle Moreau, or Omar, a native African, now owned by General Owen of Wilmington, North Carolina. He is 88 years of age and a devoted Christian. Given to Mary Jones at the Rock Bridge Alum Springs, Rock Bridge Country, Virginia. Maybe that says country, but maybe it's supposed to be county, Virginia. By General Owen, July 27, 1857. So that's what that says. It's telling that this Arabic script is the Lord's Prayer that was written by Omar, who they called Uncle Moreau. You know how they used to change our names around. Uncle Moreau. And it's supposed to be the Lord's Prayer. But what subsequently came out was that this actually isn't the Lord's Prayer. He told them it was the Lord's Prayer. They didn't know what it was because it was written in Arabic. But this 1857 document, written by Omar ibn Said, is not the Lord's Prayer. It's the 110th surah from the Holy Quran. It's a very short surah. So what we see right here, another primary document showing a verse from the Holy Quran, Surah 110, chapter 110 from the Holy Quran, written in 1857 by an African who was enslaved, but he was a Muslim when he was brought to America. He read the Quran, he knew Arabic, he wrote his autobiography in Arabic, and he also wrote this script. He let white folks believe that he was writing the Lord's Prayer, but he was so ingenious that he slipped in an actual verse from the Holy Quran while they were thinking he was writing the Lord's Prayer. But this is from 1857, and this is just another example of the existence of the Quran before even 1872, when Brother Young Pharaoh said that Islam in the Quran began. This is 1857, before the Quran and Islam supposedly came into existence. And we see reference to a verse from the Holy Quran. Now, those are two sources, but there's more. Let's keep moving. Let's keep moving. I want to keep taking us back. So now we saw the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica talking about Muhammad, talking about Islam, talking about Mecca, listing all of the chapters of the Quran. That was 8 years before Young Pharaoh said the Quran was created. Now we saw an actual verse, the entire verse from the Holy Quran written by Omar ibn Said in 1857. So that even predates the start date of what Brother Young Pharaoh said Islam and the Quran started. He said it started in 1872. We just saw documentation, primary source documentation of a Quranic verse in 1857. But there's more. There's more. Let's move to this right here. What do we have here? What we're looking at is Again, back on Internet Archive. Internet Archive is a repository for old ancient documents, manuscripts that have been digitized and kept in digital form for preservation and for to ensure longevity. This is a copy of the Quran, an actual Quran that was digitized, page for page, scanned, with a publication date of 1806. This even predates Omar ibn Said, writing of the 110th Surah he did in 1857. Now we're going and looking at a Quran published in 1806. We see down at the bottom, the Quran, commonly called Al-Quran of Muhammad. There's that spelling of Muhammad again. The first American edition, October 1806. This is a primary document, a primary source of an actual Quran published in 1806. But tell you an interesting thing about this Quran. This note to the reader. Listen to the language. This book is a long conference of God, the angels, and Muhammad, which that false prophet very grossly invented. Sometimes he introduced God who speaketh to him and teaches him his law, then an angel, then the prophets, and frequently maketh God to speak in the plural in a style that is not ordinary. They kind of going in on Muhammad and on the Quran. They talking about fables without observation. They talking about this book is a multitude of incongruous pieces and diverse repetitions of the same thing. They going in on this Quran. This is an English interpretation of the Quran. And they're basically just telling you that we really don't care about Islam. We really don't care for Prophet Muhammad. We're just going to translate this work. But before we give you the work itself, we're going to tell you what we really think about it. That's key, because as a source, this is a source that is being translated by somebody who really doesn't agree with Islam or Prophet Muhammad. But yet and still, despite their disagreement, despite their believing he's a false prophet, they're still translating the actual Quran. They're giving you chapter for chapter, translating the document. And we wind up with how many? 114 surahs. The first chapter, this is the Fatiha. In the name of God, gracious and merciful, praise be God, gracious and merciful, King of the day. This is the Quran. This is the Quran in 1806. You can scroll through this entire document. Chapter for chapter, it tells you what it needs to tell you, that this is the Quran. And this was printed in 1806. So we have yet another primary source, the actual document itself, an actual Quran from 1806. But I'm still not done. Still not done. Because we could keep going back. What is this? Now we're back to Encyclopedia Britannica again. What edition is this? This tells us, again, we see Encyclopedia Britannica. This is the third edition in 18 volumes. What is the third edition? What year is that? MDCCXCVIL. Those are Roman numerals. When you plug those Roman numerals into a converter, it gives you 1797. What we're looking at here is a primary document, a digitized copy of an actual Quran, scanned for preservation purposes. But this is a Quran that was published in 1797. So let's go to the entry for Islam. They don't call it Islam. They call it Mohammedanism. They don't call it Quran. They call it Al-Quran, as we saw in the 1806 version. Let's go to what it. Let's go to the entry on the Quran in this 1797 version of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Bear with me. And anybody could just, again, go to the Internet Archives, pull up any of these documents, scroll through the documents page by page if you see fit. Now, what do we see here? Al-Quran. Al-Quran, or Al-Quran with the K. The scripture or Bible of the Mohammedans. The scripture or Bible of the Mohammedans. Down here, the Quran is divided into 114 larger portions of very unequal length, which we call chapters. So, family, here we have again, yet another verification of the existence of the Quran previous to 1919, previous to 1872. Now we're all the way back in the 1700s. We're at 1797 with this particular Quran. I don't know if I was screen sharing, but if not, again, here we are, Al-Quran, the scripture. They used F's for S's back in those days for some reason. The scripture or Bible of the Mohammedans. The Quran is divided into 114 larger portions of very unequal length, which we call chapters. So it's telling you the makeup of the Quran is 114 chapters. It's giving you information, pages and pages of information about the Quran, what it is. So again, we have a very early source, 1797, documenting the existence of Islam in the Quran. But family, we still not done. We still not done. I want to beat this point to death. And I'm not using, very difficult to find complex kind of references. I don't have to. The points that were made about the start date of Islam, we don't need any deep digging or anything super complex to kind of refute those claims. We could use something as simple as an Encyclopedia Britannica, the internet before the internet, to dismiss a lot of these claims that are being made. But I want to deal with one more piece before we move on to something else. I would like to call your attention to one other thing. This family is what's known as the Jefferson Quran. It's 2 volumes, but they're known as the Jefferson Quran because why? They belong to Thomas Jefferson, the founding father of the country, Thomas Jefferson. He owned a copy of the Quran. This is his copy. This is important, again, because we're looking at artifacts in history, documented artifacts in history. So let's talk, the Jefferson Quran made news not long ago for another particular reason. Many people might recognize this brother for a number of different reasons. But this is Keith Ellison, the congressman from Minnesota, Muslim. When he was officially sworn in as a congressman, this isn't the official swearing in ceremony, but after the swearing in ceremony, they often have symbolic photo ops that they take where they swear they swear in on a Bible or some religious document. Keith Ellison chose to have this symbolic swearing in on the Jefferson Quran. So you see his hands on top of the Jefferson Quran being sworn in. These are authentic documents. These are the actual Qurans that were owned by Thomas Jefferson. Why is that important? Why am I making reference to that? I'll show you why. Let me see. Hopefully I was presenting that, showing that. Keith Ellison, again, with his hand on Thomas Jefferson's copies of his Quran. Why is that important? Again, we're triangulating sources, pulling from various sources. This is Thomas Jefferson's Quran. This is what Keith Ellison had his hand on as he was being sworn in. What is it telling us? It's telling us that, look at that publishing date down at the very bottom, MDCCLXIV. That's 1764. So now we're all the way back. We have an actual version of a Quran that's taken us all the way back to 1764. This is Thomas Jefferson's actual Quran, 1764. So if I'm not mistaken, we've seen a Quran from 1764, 1797, 1806. We saw the writing of Surah 110 from the Quran from Omar Ibn Said in 1857. All of those dates predate what Brother Young Pharaoh told us was the date for Islam and the Quran being established. Those being 1872 and 1919. Everything we've shown was previous to 1919, and everything we've shown except the 1911 encyclopedia was previous to 1872. So I think with all of these primary sources that we've shown, we could pretty much put to bed this notion that Islam and the Quran didn't exist previous to 1919. We could pretty much let that idea go. We can let the idea go that Islam and the Quran, they got started working on those and creating those in 1872. We can get rid of that idea. I think we have successfully dismissed those notions and those ideas. So let's move on. Let's move on to another point that our brother Young Pharaoh made with regard to the Nation of Islam, and it deals with the Ku Klux Klan. I'll just play what the video the brother played regarding what he had to say about the Nation of Islam meeting with the Ku Klux Klan. He referenced Malcolm. He showed the video of what Malcolm had to say, and let's look at and listen to that right now.
I mentioned the conspiracy between the Muslims and the right wing in this country. I know for a fact that there is a conspiracy between the Muslims and the Lincoln Rockwell Nazi and also the Ku Klux Klan. There is a conspiracy. Describe this conspiracy. Well, the Ku Klux Klan made a deal, or were trying to make a deal with Elijah Muhammad in 1960 in the home of Jeremiah Ed, minister in Atlanta at that time, who was president minister in Philadelphia. They were trying to make a deal with him to make available to Elijah Muhammad a county-sized tract of land in Georgia or South Carolina, where Elijah Muhammad could then induce Negroes to migrate and make it appear that his program of a segregated state or separated state was feasible.
Okay, now let me stop screen sharing. I'm going to take my time because I accidentally ended my last broadcast trying to hit the screen share button. Stop screen share, and I accidentally hit stop broadcast. So I'm going to move a little slow. So let me explain to y'all what Malcolm just said so that y'all can understand the depth. Elijah Muhammad, according to Malcolm, made a deal with the Ku Klux Klan for some land in the South, okay, and for Elijah's requirements, he wanted his people to be there and make it appear to the public that he has successfully created an area to live in a manner of being segregated from the white man. So this is the extent that Elijah Muhammad was willing to go to make himself appear as something that he was not. Okay? That he would make a deal with the same people. He's in the public eye telling you the white man is the devil, but he talking to the devil behind closed doors. Okay? Making deals with the devil. Okay?
Making deals with the devil. Okay. Let's talk about that. Yeah, let's talk about that. That's right and exact, brother. The Nation of Islam did in fact meet with the Ku Klux Klan. But we have to really look into what Malcolm says and what Malcolm doesn't say. I want to read a couple of sections from this particular book right here. It's a biography of Elijah Muhammad, Claude Andrew Clegg. Gets referenced a lot of information. By no means pro Nation of Islam or pro Elijah Muhammad, but valuable nonetheless. Let's look at what Brother Clegg has to say about that meeting that took place with the Ku Klux Klan and the Nation of Islam. All right, let's deal with this first page and see what's being said about this meeting between the Nation of Islam and the Ku Klux Klan. Let's start here. Interestingly, the relationship between the Nation of Islam and its closest ideological counterparts in the white community went beyond common ideology and rhetoric. During a secret meeting in Atlanta on the night of January 28th, 1961, Malcolm said December 1960, that he wasn't a part of it past then. But we learned that January 28th, 1961, Malcolm X and Jeremiah X, the local Muslim minister, met with members of the KKK to discuss their mutual hostility toward integration. According to the accounts of Malcolm X and an FBI informant present at the conference, the two sides exchanged views on race, and the New York minister went so far as to attribute the whole struggle for integration to a Jewish conspiracy carried out by unsuspecting blacks. So Malcolm said he had no part of this situation after December 1960, but we see here that he was a part of it until at least January 28, 1961. He, meaning Malcolm, also intimated that the Klan should kill those whites who advocated integration. Besides swapping platitudes with segregationists, the ultimate reason for the attendance of Muhammad's representatives at the gathering appears to have been to protect Southern mosques from the threat of destruction at the hands of a revitalized Klan. Toward this purpose, they negotiated a non-aggression pact with the Klansmen, specifying that Muslim affairs in the South would not be censored by the KKK as long as the nation did not aid civil rights activists there. So what's sinister in this meeting? There's nothing sinister at all. Meeting with the opposition, meeting with your enemy is what nations do, what heads of state do. That's why we have a United Nations. That's why we have a G20. That's why we have shuttle diplomacy. That's why we have bilateral agreement. We meet with those we are in opposition with, wherein we could carve out mutually agreeable circumstances where our interests align. That's why it's called the Nation of Islam. That's nation business. That's what a nation engages in. Nothing sinister in the motives it tells you. The purpose was to make sure when we come build these mosques, it ain't gonna be no static. It ain't gonna jump off. So we negotiating peace treaties as we come and infiltrate and get our people, save our people behind enemy lines. That's wise leadership. Let's read further. The KKK's motive for meeting with the Muslims was apparently to maintain segregation by bolstering the Nation of Islam as a viable vehicle of nationhood for African Americans. Klan negotiators, according to one source, may have offered the Muslims as much as 20,000 acres of Georgian land for use as a settlement for Black separatists. In general, the nocturnal dealings of the nation and the Invisible Empire, the Ku Klux Klan, were mutually advantageous. And to some extent, both sides seem to have kept their promises. Following the conference, Malcolm X, who would later regret his collusion with the Klansmen, supposedly, dutifully reported to Chicago the land offer made by the KKK. As for Jeremiah X, the Atlanta minister was now in good standing with the powerful Klan and the Peach State, it should say. He would later be warmly received at KKK meetings as the Southern representative of the Nation of Islam. Goes on to talk about Elijah Muhammad's interaction with the American Nazi Party. A lot of people say, oh, the Nazis showed up to save everything. Why were the Nazis in the meetings? For the very same reason. They are opposition. And nations meet with their opposition to broker peace agreements and treaties. But let's read further. During a gathering of 8,000 people at Uline Arena on June 25th, 1961, Rockwell and 20 of his stormtroopers in full Nazi regalia sat among Muslims to hear Malcolm X deliver a talk entitled Separation or Death. Muhammad himself did not show up for this Washington, D.C. meeting. He was reportedly fighting off a cold in Chicago. However, he would get a chance to address Rockwell and the Nazis at the 1962 Saviors Day Convention held at the Chicago International Amphitheater on February 25th. His speech touched on all the familiar Muslim themes, including a separate territory for Blacks, economic self-help, and respect for Black womanhood. The talk also included a prediction that Allah would kill the whites in accordance with Nation of Islam prophecy. So even when the Nazis showed up, Elijah Muhammad didn't change any of his rhetoric. He didn't change any of his teaching. He didn't soften his teachings. They were very clear what the position of the Nation of Islam was, and the messenger and the nation never backed down from what their position was. Separation, and in the end, a total destruction of the white race. So there's no kowtowing here. There's no illicit kind of conspiring with the Ku Klux Klan. And Clegg goes even further and proves this point. Despite appearances, Muhammad, of course, had no love for the KKK or the Nazis. Individuals of their ilk were responsible for many of the lynchings and other atrocities against Blacks that had disturbed him since he was a youth in rural Georgia. As recent as 1957, he had received a letter from J.B. Stoner, the head of the Christian anti-Jewish party. The correspondence was heavily laden with white supremacist rhetoric, describing Islam as a nigger religion and Blacks as racially inferior. It goes on to say, given that Muhammad had no illusions regarding the intentions of the Nazis, the Klan, the Christian Party, or any other white racist group, his willingness to deal with such organizations hints at deeper themes within his philosophy and perception of these groups. The interactions between the Muslims and white supremacists can only be explained in relation to the political context of the early 1960s and the organizational interests of the Nation of Islam. These contacts were probably not intended to result in any kind of working partnership with segregationists, but instead to preclude confrontations between Muslims and white racists and to increase membership. Pay very close attention if you haven't been paying attention thus far. Muhammad recognized the growing strength of the Klan in the South, and like Marcus Garvey, like who? Like Marcus Garvey, chose to negotiate a truce before a war could break out between mosques and claverns. Marcus Garvey, hold on. I've been reading from these documents from the book, An Original Man, The Life and Times of Elijah Muhammad by Claude Andrew Clegg. And he just mentioned Marcus Garvey. Why would he mention Marcus Garvey? Read it again. Muhammad recognized the growing strength of the Klan in the South and, like Marcus Garvey, chose to negotiate a truce before a war could break out between mosques and claverns, the KKK. Well, we're not going to speculate as to why Garvey was mentioned. We're not going to do that. We're coming right and exact with actual facts. Why would he mention Marcus Garvey in talking about the Nation of Islam's meeting with the Ku Klux Klan? I'll show you why. Let's move to the Literary Digest. What is the Literary Digest? The Literary Digest, back in the day, was a weekly periodical. They publish weekly, and they just have articles about a wide variety of different topics and stories. So why am I mentioning Literary Digest? Because in August of 1922, the Digest had, let me go back, just so I can show you what we're dealing with. Literary Digest, again, another digitized copy of an artifact. This is an actual document that has been digitized for preservation purposes. The Literary Digest from 1922. July 1922 through September 1922. See the various pages, various subjects that they're talking about. This was a very popular magazine during that time. So let's go to August 19th. Let's go to August 19th, 1922. So we can piece together why people are associating Marcus Garvey and the Ku Klux Klan. Here's an article written in the Literary Digest about Marcus Garvey and how people were gunning for the Negro Moses. He had detractors in the Black community. But let's read about some incidents that took place during one of his parades in New York. Harlem was in gala attire. Lenox and 7th Avenues were especially decorated. Flags and bunting were in evidence. The colors of the association, black, green, and red, predominating. So just setting the stage, talking about one of the Honorable Marcus Garvey's processions and parades in New York. During the procession, there were several animated discussions between marchers and bystanders, but none resulted seriously. At Lenox Avenue and 135th Street, a Garveyite took exception to a remark of an onlooker charging Garvey with being a black member of the Ku Klux Klan. This is an unpopular subject in Harlem, and the crowd was with the anti-Garvey man. Prompt interference by the police quelled the argument. Wow. Why would people be talking about Garvey and calling him a black member of the Ku Klux Klan? Well, let's keep reading. The article continues. It appears that Garvey has had dealings with the Klan. On the 10th of July last, the New York Tribune reported what the Ku Klux Klan means to the American Negro and how Edward Young Clark, acting imperial wizard of the Klan, told it in plain words to Marcus Garvey, provisional president of the Republic of Africa, was reported last night by Garvey in his presidential robes of violet, red, and green to 4,000 wildly excited Negroes in Liberty Hall, Harlem. Marcus Garvey speaking. I had an interview with acting Imperial Wizard Clark in Atlanta, June 25th, said Garvey, to learn the truth of the Klan's attitude toward the race I represent. He told me the Klan is determined to make America a white man's country, and the Klan is a mighty powerful white organization that represents the opinions and the prejudices of every true white man in the United States. Let me make sure I'm presenting. Hopefully I am. I tell you, the Universal Negro Improvement Association is just like the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan wants America for the white folks. We want Africa for Africans. This understanding reached between Marcus Garvey and the Ku Klux Klan is regarded by the New York Call as one of the most curious examples of brothers in arms. And Garvey's own paper tells us that the affair has caused considerable commotion in Negro newspaper circles, adding, in the New York World on Sunday, July 23rd, Mr. Garvey informed the reading public that he visited the Imperial Kleagle to get firsthand information regarding the plans, purposes, and activities of an organization that has been cussed and discussed pro and con. We recommend a careful perusal of that article. It shows that Mr. Garvey was in his senses and in his right mind when he entered the lion's den. Going further, in that article, he denies having surrendered to the wizard. With equal vehemence, he denies having formed an alliance with the Klan. What really occurred, he declares, and all that occurred was this. Knowing the power and influence and intention of the Klan, I interviewed the executive for the purpose of getting them, if possible, to adopt a different attitude toward the race and thus prevent a repetition in many ways of what happened during the days of Reconstruction. Now, family, let's digest that. What we just saw was the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, a hero. In fact, I have his flag. I don a flag. A hero in our community also saw fit to meet with the Klan for strategic purposes. So how is it that the Nation of Islam can meet with the Ku Klux Klan, and we're condemned? We're told that we conspired with the Nation of Islam to undermine black people, when Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Marcus Garvey, did the exact same thing, meeting with the Klan. Again, that's what a nation does. A nation meets with its adversaries and its enemies to broker agreements and treaties. That's visionary thinking. That's nation building. That's what a nation does. The Honorable Marcus Garvey was right to meet with the Klan, just as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was right to meet and broker peace treaties and agreements with their open enemies, our open enemies, the Klan and the Nazi Party. But before I move from this point, that was a secondary source. It was talking about what Marcus Garvey said in the events. Let's move back to the primary source. The actual speech that was referenced itself. Hold on, before I do that, you can find the speech right here that was referenced in the article from the Literary Digest. Selected writings and speeches of Marcus Garvey, right on page 74. You can read the speech, the actual speech that he gave, but I'll pull it up just so we can see a portion. What is the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey telling us? July 9th, 1922. He starts out. Well, let me make sure I got it right. Okay. Honorable Marcus Garvey tells of interview with the Ku Klux Klan. This is the actual speech. He starts out at the break. In keeping with my duties as leader of a large movement, as one of the advocates of Negro rights and Negro liberty, as an officer of the largest Negro organization in the world, I became interested in the activities of an organization known as the Ku Klux Klan. Not because I wanted to be a member of the Klan, but because I wanted to know the truth about the Klan's attitude toward the race I represent. That's a statesman. That's a statesman. For that reason, a conference was arranged between the acting imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan and myself, which took place in Atlanta, Georgia on the 25th of June. This is 1922. He goes on to talk about the interview, what was discussed. And I'll just move over here. The Negro's attitude toward such an organization should not be to stand off, not knowing its program, not understanding it, and saying and writing all kinds of things against it with the intention of aggravating its program and its attitude toward the race. But the duty of the leadership of the Negro race, finding itself in such an unenviable position, is to study the thing, to understand the thing, and to get as much information as possible about the thing in your own interests. That's wisdom. That's wisdom. And that explains why the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey decided to meet with the imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in Atlanta. So we can't condemn the Nation of Islam for meeting with the Ku Klux Klan and not condemn the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey for doing the exact same before the nation did, 40 years before the nation did. Neither group should be condemned for meeting. That's a wise decision, to meet with your enemy behind enemy lines to make plans for the safety of your people. That's wise. So neither should be condemned. But it seems as though that history of the Honorable Marcus Garvey is not known or either is not talked about. In either case, there's no excuses from this point on. We cannot condemn the messenger, Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam, nor the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, because what they did was wise in meeting with that organization. But before I leave this point, I just want to, again, beat this point to death. Because when we read about the meeting with the nation in 1961, we read about Malcolm, who was there enthusiastically, but we also read about Jeremiah X. And Jeremiah X was the minister of the Nation of Islam in Atlanta at that time. But Jeremiah X talked about this meeting with the Nation of Islam and the Ku Klux Klan. He talked about a lot. He talked about a lot in his interview, but he also talked about that meeting. And I want to play an excerpt of his talk just to give you even more context surrounding that meeting with the Ku Klux Klan. From the words, this is another primary source. from the man himself who was there with Malcolm. He traveled, he lived with Malcolm at one point, establishing mosques all throughout the country for the Nation of Islam. Minister Jeremiah Shabazz out of Philadelphia, mosque number 12, knows Malcolm. He lived with Malcolm, traveled with Malcolm, and he talked at length about Malcolm X and the meeting with the Ku Klux Klan.
But I wanted to just get your attention back down south for a minute. Yeah. Did you have, as a minister of the messenger, did you have any encounters with the Ku Klux Klan, for example?
Oh, of course. I'm the first one to have an encounter with the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes, sir. How can you elaborate on that? You know, in terms of, was it your character that made it, you know, they didn't feel intimidated, or you knew how to handle them, or what
I learned how to handle them. But they approached me.
Okay.
Because Malcolm had come to Atlanta. I put out some flyers. They got hold of the flyer, and on the flyer was where the meeting was going to be held. So the day of the meeting, the Klan sent a telegram there addressed to me, saying they would like to meet with me and Malcolm.
Okay.
And after the meeting was over, I showed Malcolm this telegram. He said, wow, you know, he didn't know what to make out of it. So he says, let's call the messenger. So we called the messenger. And the messenger says, yeah, brother, go ahead. You can meet with them devils, see what they're talking about. And so then they had a phone number on there. I called the devil. I told him, yes, we'll meet with him. You know, so he told me, well, we can come to his house. I said, oh, no, I'm not coming to your house.
They went there to do what?
No. Oh,
The stoner?
No.
Okay.
I met Stone afterwards.
Okay.
David Duke at that time, he was a boy.
He was just in the ranks.
Yeah, he was just in the ranks. A boy. He probably was a real little boy.
I love that.
Because I'm talking about early 60s.
Yes, sir.
This is after Stoner had written the letter.
Okay.
So, I think, yeah, it was. So, when the devil told me to come to his house, he told me where he lived. I said, everybody in the city knew that was Klan territory over there. I said, no. I said, you can come to my house. You know, his thing was, I'm not scared of coming to no nigga's house. I'll come to your house. So, Malcolm, instead of going back to New York, he waited around because we set the meeting up for Thursday. So, sure enough, on Thursday, we're waiting, peeping out the window. Here comes a 10-car motorcade down my street. Full of Klansmen. They stopped in front of my door, but nobody got out. They sat there. All the blacks on my street, they jumped up and flew off their porch. I mean, they were just running because they knew about what that devil would do down. You know, when you see him coming, somebody's going to get killed.
That's right.
See, and so a cop came up and he talked to the lead, somebody in the lead car. They were talking. We just peeping out the window. So then they drove away. But apparently they had gone around the block because they came right back again, stopped in front of the door. And man got out of the lead car, a little short fellow, very short. Came up to the door. I opened it. Looked at me. You Jeremiah? I said, yes. I'm Mr. Fellows. He handed his card. I said, come on in. I didn't have to call her white folks, sir. Come on in, sir. Came in. Malcolm was standing there. He looked at him. You Malcolm? Yes, sir. So he came on in, stood. Said, I'm saying, he said, I'm telling you niggas something. He said, if I'm not out of here in 15 minutes, we're going to burn the house down. So Malcolm said, oh no, Mr. Fellow, so you won't have to burn the house down. You know, we're not going to do anything to you. We worry about you doing something else. So he sat down, kept his coat on, and we talked just back and forth, getting familiar. So naturally, we all looking at our watch. We're going to stay here beyond the 15 minutes before you go back out there. So after about 8 or 9 minutes, Malcolm suggested, now that you warm the air a little bit, why don't you go out and tell your people that everything's all right? So he said, yeah, he did that. So he went back out, and he came back in with a preacher and 2 other people, some little politician, but they were all from down around in South Georgia, where Jimmy Carter comes from, around Plains, Willacoochee, Georgia, all that kind of crack. So they came in, we all sat around the dining room table, and they started telling us what they wanted, why they wanted to meet with us. And Fellows, W.S. Fellows, he was the ringleader. But he told us he was not the Grand Dragon. He was just top representative. In fact, he had a card in his pocket. He pulled it out, had like a buzzard's claw. He said it was an eagle's claw on it. Yes, and then he was a memory just standing of the claw, the KLAW. He said, so I heard y'all got your FOI. Well, this is our claw. No nigga ever seen a card like this before, so I asked him, could I touch it? You have to ask white folks, even if you could touch something. So we looked at the cards. First niggas ever to lay eyes on that card. So, but back then, that's how they talked to you in Georgia. You were not a human. You were a nigga, you were a boy, you were an uncle, but you were not Mr. No white man in the South ever called a black person Mr. or a black woman Miss. Right. No. When you left Virginia and you left D.C., you ceased to be Mr. or Mrs. You were then just nigger, or boy or girl. So the Klansmen, they were notorious. Their thing was, you niggas, but it's like the Negroes use the word MF. They use it, with the wrong inflection, that means he's gonna kill you. With the right inflection, you're all right. So it was the same thing with where they use the word nigger. So this little devil, he started talking and saying, telling what he wanted. And so Malcolm was saying, well, he wanted to know would we join with them to fight the scourge of integration. He said, now, you boys don't want to integrate, and we don't want to integrate. So we have something in common. And so Malcolm did his best to explain to him that separation and segregation are not the same thing. But it fell on really deaf ears. That rolled right past them. All they know was that we didn't like integration, and that made us acceptable niggas in their sight. That we were opposed to integration, and that we were satisfied being niggas. And they had never met any niggas that were satisfied with being niggas, so we became acceptable niggas at that point. And so then he began to explain his true motive. He said, this Martin Luther King, they didn't call him Martin Luther King, called him Martin Luther Coon. Say, this Martin Luther King, this nigga is just upsetting the whole South. He said, this nigga needs to be silenced. So Malcolm said, no, we don't want to kill our brother. See, we don't believe in what King is doing, but we don't want to see him dead. After all, he's a black man. So I said, well, no, we don't want to kill the nigga. We just want to teach him a lesson. We just want to, we taking this nigga out in the woods and beat him good and beat some disintegration out of him. And at that time, King lived right around the corner from me. I knew where he lived, but they didn't know where he lived. Because King's followers and all his members, they kept his whereabouts well hidden. But the Klan, they wanted to go there at night, because they find his house and burn it down, throw some gasoline on it, whatever. And so I told him I didn't know where King lived. I couldn't help him there. But they kept saying, you can find out, you can find where the rest of these niggas is. No, I know I can't find them. So King, even to this day, I mean, he's dead now, but his family don't know how I saved him from an earlier death. Yes. Yeah, because they really wanted him. They wanted him bad.
We let's stop right there. That's a primary source straight from the lips of Minister Jeremiah X, who was with Malcolm at those meetings with the Ku Klux Klan, making it very clear the strategic nature and the mutual interest, the interest convergence on integration or not being integrated. Rather, the Klan didn't want integration. The nation didn't want integration, so they came together, make a truce, make a treaty for protection for the Muslims, for land acquisition, for one of the stated goals of the Nation of Islam, a separate territory. That's straight from the horse's mouth, for lack of a better phrase. Minister Jeremiah X telling you firsthand about that interview. He even noted that they offered, they wanted to kill Dr. King. They wanted them, the nation, Minister Jeremiah and Malcolm, to offer up Dr. King, but they refused. As much as they were against Dr. King and his teaching, he was Black, and they weren't going to offer up one of their own, no matter how much they disagreed, to one of the enemy, to the Klan. So there's no conspiring here. There's no conspiracy against Black folks. And we've shown that, and we've proven that. So let's put that away and let's keep it moving. I don't have but a couple more points that I want to touch on. One point being the death of Malcolm X. It's been said ever since Malcolm was assassinated. The nation killed Malcolm. The nation killed Malcolm. The nation killed, Elijah ordered it. The nation killed Malcolm. Let's just be clear and let's just be frank. Yes, members of the Nation of Islam killed Malcolm X. Period. Turn the page. We can't deny that. But that fact, that point has been used as a bludgeon to beat the Nation of Islam over the head ever since it happened, without understanding the reasons and the context. It's unfortunate that Brother Pharaoh, young Pharaoh, after he said a lot of the reckless things that he said, attacking the messenger, the minister, the savior, that he got his inbox flooded with threats, threatening himself, threatening his family, his child, the mother of his children. That's not advised. That's not advised. But we have to understand that there are people who love the messenger and the minister so much because the messenger and the minister saved their lives. It resurrected them from nothing, out of prison, out of jail, off of drugs, off of alcohol, off of the streets. They have so much love for those people and those teachings that when you come against those teachings and those saviors to them, they come against you. I'm not justifying anything, but that's the reality of it. We have so much love for the minister and the messenger and the savior because they resurrected us. They gave us life. And to many of us, when you come against them, that is a personal attack. And they come against you. Again, that's not a justification, but that's just the reality of the world. And yes, people caught feelings behind what Malcolm was saying about the messenger. And Malcolm understood that people would catch feelings. He knew people would catch feelings. He knew what the consequences were. And on several occasions, he said, I was willing to live with those consequences, but he knew exactly what he was doing and saying and the repercussions. So what happened to Malcolm, but it happened to others for reckless talk against the messenger. We look at 1973, Washington, D.C. Hamas Abdul Khalis was living in the house that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar bought for him on 16th Street up in D.C. He wrote a letter saying a lot of reckless things about Elijah Muhammad And a bunch of brothers from the Philly mosque took a trip down to DC, found his house, and slaughtered everybody in that house, men, women, and children, all because of words spoken out of turn and with disrespect and malice towards Elijah Muhammad. Again, I'm not sitting here justifying the murder of anyone, but I'm merely saying we have to understand that the world we live in, there are consequences when certain types of wording is used against certain type of people. That's a point that always gets overlooked when it comes to the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X. But Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam aren't the only ones who have that history. We're just the only ones that get talked about. But let's look a little bit, let's look around a little bit to see where else we can find instances of the history of an organization getting rid of those who have been considered or labeled, branded as traitors. Where else can we find that? The World of Marcus Garvey, Race and Class in Modern Society. This is a book. This is a book that talks about Marcus Garvey and his life and his impact. But we're going to scroll down for a minute, and we're going to dive into a particular section of the history of the Honorable Marcus Garvey and the UNIA, particularly the murder of James Eason. I'm going to spend a little time with this, so please, family, bear with me as I read. The UNIA's crisis of 1922 produced an epidemic of local violence in New York City. The branches, unable to reconcile and often even comprehend the torturous strategy and personal rivalries of the parent body, were themselves paralyzed by acrimony and disaffection. One response to the setbacks and frustrations was violence against internal and external dissenters. The incidents involving use of strong-arm tactics that Garvey's 8 critics cited in their letter to the Attorney General were genuine. Some Garveyites interpreted literally the rhetorical violence that punctuated the speeches of UNIA officials. Bellicose oratory often stimulated the violent proclivities of petty criminals and pushed the political consciousness of respectable members of the working class towards sanctioning violence as a legitimate response to criticism or treachery, as the fervid called it. Most of the victims were men named and excoriated by the UNI leadership, blacks, not whites, and most often former Garveyites. Blacks, not whites, and most often former Garveyites. Now, let me deviate for a second. A lot of people talk about the nation never riding on other black folks, but only riding on the nation never riding on white folks, but only riding on other black folks. Not true. Not true. History of the FOI by Wakil Allah documents meticulously the early history of the Nation of Islam, and he talks at length about a couple of skirmishes that the Muslim had in the 30s with the police. We know that there were standoffs with Malcolm and the FOI in New York and the police. We know in LA, when the police bum rushed the mosque, there was a skirmish with the police. Even in New York, when New York was ran by Minister Farrakhan, there was a skirmish with the police, and one of the officers even wound up getting killed. So I'm not glorifying this violence, but I'm merely talking history. The nation has always had a history of putting hands on those who violate its members, black and white. But as we read about Garvey in the UNIA, most of the victims were men named and excoriated by the UNIA leadership, blacks, not whites, and most often former Garveyites. The sin was treason, not racism. The most important victim of the violence was the Reverend James Eason, the UNI's former American leader and leading internal critic in 1922. Expelled during the 1922 convention, Eason continued his battle against Garvey by organizing the rival Negro Improvement Alliance. His challenge ended abruptly when he was shot and killed in New Orleans after he spoke at a black church on the evening of January 1st, 1923. That's the same night that the Rosewood Massacre occurred in Florida. Before he died in the hospital, Eason described the attack. He initially heard one shot. Unaware that he had been hit, Eason turned around and was shot again in the forehead. He believed he was attacked by 3 Garveyites to prevent his testifying at the upcoming mail fraud trial. Although Eason could not identify the men, associates with him at the shooting identified 2 of them as Frederick Dyer and William Shakespeare of New Orleans. The 3rd man was unknown to them. Subsequently, Dyer's wife, Celeste, named Esau Ramus to complete the trio. Interesting history. Interesting history. Let's move on. Marcus Garvey's associates. Marcus Garvey's associates in New York believed that he had ordered Ramus to shoot Eason. Robert Poston, Assistant President General, threatened to resign because Garvey openly bragged about the death. Assistant Secretary General J.B. Yearwood insisted that he had seen Garvey's letter authorizing the killing. Poston and Sidney DeBerg, the former West Indian organizer, believed that Garvey had sent Thomas Anderson, commissioner of Louisiana and a parent body official, to New Orleans to complete Ramus's preparation for the shooting. Both had overheard Anderson tell friends that Eason got what was coming to him. Implying that he possessed inside information, Anderson informed an undercover agent that Ramus had shot Eason, but was certain that nobody would be able to prove it. Nevertheless, convincing evidence implicating Garvey does not exist. Because Ramus was never tried, his confession on May 6th that Garvey had authorized the killing, which he then carried out, was never subjected to cross-examination. Okay. Let's keep moving. It is likely, however, that Ramus shot Eason. He told the police that he had planned the attack, though he never said the actual firing was done by Dyer, aided by Shakespeare. Okay, so now they're still implicating the 3. Evidence linking Garvey to the murder was more tenuous and improbable. His initial boasting did not mean he actually planned the murder, only that he gloated over it. Garvey had often claimed credit for militant deeds that took place independent of his will or inspiration. Then, too, Ramus's accusations must be heavily discounted by his questionable character and his vulnerability at the time he made them. Convicted of attempted assault, in jail waiting to be sentenced, feeling abandoned by the UNIA, Ramus had every motive to provide the information the government wanted in order to receive a light sentence. Existing evidence cannot chart with precision the plotting and carrying out of the Eason murder, but it permits an exploration of the impact of Garvey's militant rhetoric on his diverse followers. Everyone agreed that Dyer, Shakespeare, and Ramus had disrupted Eason's meeting in New Orleans and that Garvey had encouraged them. It is also true that Garvey and many Garveyites approved of the killing. One woman in Chicago explained that it was the duty of any member to protect the organization against men like Eason, who betrayed his oath made to Marcus Garvey. No traitor could live in the Garvey movement. So what we see with this family is that the Nation of Islam is not the only one with a history of assassinating those who leave and talk bad about the leader, and those who are in a position to go around the country bad talking the leader. The Nation of Islam is not the only one with that history. As we just read and saw, there were questionable accounts of the Honorable Marcus Garvey's role in the assassination of Mr. Eason. He was a disgruntled member of the UNIA, like Malcolm. He left and tried to start another organization, like Malcolm. He went around bad mouthing, talking, and was subsequently going to testify at the hearing of Marcus Garvey, much like Malcolm went around in the media bad mouthing Elijah Muhammad, and even put two of the sisters, the wives of Elijah Muhammad, up to pressing charges and bringing the messenger up on charges. So we see that this exact same scenario with Elijah and Malcolm played out in previous decades with Marcus Garvey and Mr. Eason. But we never hear that Garvey should be dismissed like Elijah Muhammad should be dismissed. We never hear people dismissing and trashing the UNIA in Garvey like people dismiss and trash the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the Nation of Islam. There are religious zealots in every community. Every community. And we cannot focus just on the Nation of Islam and its violent history, its history of dealing with its traitors, and not deal with the history of Marcus Garvey in the UNIA, where we just read the quote from the sister in the UNIA that said that you have to deal with traitors in that manner. They must be dealt with like that. But the focus is always the nation and Malcolm, and never Garvey and Eason. We got to stop that hypocrisy. This is history we're dealing with. And we can't dismiss some history and then put other history up on a pedestal. We can't do that if we want to consider ourselves scholars and legitimate thinkers and lecturers on these kinds of topics. So family, the last thing I want to talk about is a lot of the comments being made about the NOI and Scientology. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time saying this. The minister has already made clear that he has not joined Scientology. He has not relinquished control of the Nation of Islam to Scientologists. He has said that he saw something of benefit and of value in Scientology to help the psychological well-being of Black people. And so he grabbed on to that one piece with the hopes of implementing it among members of the Nation of Islam, with the hopes of alleviating a lot of the mental baggage that we carry from slavery, Jim Crow, segregation, and just our lived experiences as Black people in America. So that's not joining Scientology, it's not being ran by Scientology. That's seeing something of value in Scientology and trying to use it to gain benefit for our people. But it's never talked about in that way. It's never viewed in that way. And it's very peculiar for a specific reason. And I'll talk about why. I want to go back to Minister Jeremiah X, the minister who traveled with Malcolm, lived with Malcolm. He made another very interesting comment that sheds light on the hypocrisy involved in those who criticize Minister Farrakhan for using aspects of Scientology. We're finishing up, family, so just bear with me just a few more minutes. Listen to what Minister Jeremiah had to say.
The messenger's son, Herbert Muhammad, and we used to be real tight. And Herbert used to say to me, whenever I go to Chicago, what is it with this Malcolm? And I would try to tell him, because they didn't know Malcolm too well.
Yes, sir.
But they knew that I had lived with him, so they would ask me, what is that? I said, well, Malcolm has got a lot of street smarts.
Okay.
He's got this street mentality.
Yes, sir.
And everybody he approaches from a street mentality, not from a Muslim perspective, from that standpoint, it was always, when he dealt with brothers, he dealt with them as though they were street niggas, and he was the wise street nigga, and never from the brotherhood thing.
Yes, sir.
And so Herbert was confused about Malcolm, and he said, well, what did I say about look? Malcolm comes out of this book called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. In fact, Malcolm was in Philadelphia during the 50s. His thing was, everybody get this book. He used to teach out of that book. So I got the book, I read it thoroughly, and then I saw him more clearly, because he was doing everything right out of the book.
Dale Carnegie.
Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yes, sir.
And Malcolm knew, he learned from that book how to manipulate people.
Yes, sir.
And he was a great manipulator of people. But
So this is the book, family. This is the book that Malcolm swore by. This is the book that moved Malcolm so much that he had to bring it into the mosque and teach from this book in the mosque, implement the teachings and the practices in the mosque. This is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. You see right there on the cover who you're dealing with when you're dealing with Dale Carnegie. According to the teachers of the Nation of Islam, that is a devil. But Malcolm saw fit to use aspects of his program, his teaching, to bring into the mosque to do what? To help the believers in the mosque in their dealings with each other and with those outside of the mosque. Is Malcolm a sellout for running to this devil and implementing the teachings of Dale Carnegie, implementing those in the mosque, teaching those in the mosque? Is Malcolm a sellout like Minister Farrakhan is said to be? Or did Malcolm see something of value like the minister sees in auditing and decided to bring that in and incorporate that, because the black man is God. We're the author of all knowledge. And if there's an aspect of this knowledge over here, what's wrong with bringing it? So that members of the mosque and members of our community, the greater, larger black community, can benefit from it. We could deal better with each other. What's wrong with that? Malcolm didn't see anything wrong with picking from this white man, Dale Carnegie, and bringing in How to Win Friends and Influence People. So why do we have a problem when Minister Farrakhan does the exact same thing? Sees something of value in Scientology, picks a piece off and uses that for the benefit of his people. Again, family, we have to stop the hypocrisy. So with that, I'm going to end my talk. Again, I just want to reiterate that this isn't, I haven't given this in any kind of spirit of malice or any kind of, in any kind of antagonistic way. This is just following up what Brother Young Pharaoh suggested that we do. If we find fault with something that he posted, well, then respond to it, provide counter arguments. And that's what I'm doing. No shots fired. I'm merely standing up and offering my thoughts with backing, with evidence, in defense of the Savior, the messenger, and the minister, and in defense of the teachings that saved my life. I accepted these teachings in 1992, and everything that is good in my life, and then everything that people look at me as being so-called successful comes from my accepting of those teachings as taught by Minister Louis Farrakhan. So if I look around and I see nobody addressing the information that young Pharaoh introduced, then that means it's my job to address it. And I pray Allah that something that I said is meaningful, makes sense. This is just my contribution to this discussion, this ongoing discussion. So I hope that I've pleased Allah in representing these teachings. I got a weight off my chest, praise be to Allah. And, I hope that in some way this information benefits you in your study and in your quest for knowledge and quest for truth. So again, young Pharaoh and other brothers out there, keep going hard, brother. I just ask that you be a little more diligent in your studies, be a little bit more discerning in your choice of references, in your choice of scholars and scholarship. Keep your fire. We all in the same fight for our people, brother. We all got different lanes that we go about it in, but we need to make sure that whatever lane we're in, we're using the proper information, verified information, primary sources, secondary sources, authoritative sources. And if we all continue to try to do that, brother, then we could just put a dent into this stranglehold that this enemy has on our people. So with that, I thank you for listening. I thank you for your time, and I leave you as I came before you with the greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum.